At the outset of World War II, the British sent an expeditionary force into Belgium to help the French push back the invading German armies. But Germany was too strong. With hundreds of thousands of English troops surrounded at the town of Dunkirk, a massive evacuation was planned. It was an impossible task, but amidst the tragedy of loss, there was also the miracle at Dunkirk. This is where the British took their first major stand against the Germans, on the battlefront. On September 1st, 1939, 112 divisions of the German army roll into Poland. By May 1940, Hitler orders the implementation of Plan Yellow for the invasion of Holland, Belgium, and France. "136 divisions are committed to bring the French to their knees." Adolf Hitler then plans to cross the Channel to England. He is confident he can defeat the armies of the Low Countries. But a British expeditionary force of 250,000 men has been sent to defend France and can pose stiff opposition.
The British Expeditionary Force was, in contemporary parlance, a strike force. It was the sum total of the forces Britain could put into the field in Europe. It moved from Britain to France soon after the declaration of war in September 1939, and by May 1940 it was actually the most powerful army on the Allied side.
The German plan is a two-pronged attack to seal off the French First Army, the British Expeditionary Force, and the Belgian Army.
Well, the Germans had been riding high. Everything had gone their way. They were convinced that the war would be over quickly, that they were going to defeat the British, and that the war would be over and they'd be home by fall. Everything had gone so well in the spring of 1944. They had very few casualties, and they were completely high on the glory of winning. The Dutch, being a very small nation with no sizable military force, the Belgians the same way, there was no chance that the Germans would be stopped by the Dutch or the Belgians.
The Germans handily defeat the Belgian army with military superiority and strength.
When the Germans opened the offensive in the West, the British Expeditionary Force moved into Belgium as part of what was called the Dial Plan. They were expecting that the major German move would come through Belgium, past Brussels, the way it had in 1914. Civilians were glad to see them, showed they were not alone, but there were already disconcerting signs. There were crowds of refugees already taking shape on the road, Belgians fleeing German air attacks.
With their light movable army, the British take up positions quickly.
As the British moved into Belgium, was some days before they met the German army. What they did encounter was first the German Air Force. There were initial attacks on British positions.
On May 14th, 4 days after the invasion, General Erwin Rommel orders his 7th Panzer Division, known as the Ghost Division, across the Meuse River.
This was the spearhead of the German advance towards Dunkirk. It was called the Ghost Division because it moved so fast the French High Command could not keep track of its location.
Only 1 day later, German troops marched victoriously into Holland. Rommel is now convinced the way to the west is open.
The British morale endured despite the repeated defeats of the French army. This was a strong force, a lot of pre-war regulars, and had a great deal of confidence in itself and its leaders.
Because of the weakness of the other armies, the British forces begin to fall back toward the coastal towns. The Germans have been able to break through French defenses and create a dangerous 50-mile gap in the lines. The Germans are on their way to yet another conquest.
Obviously, they felt extremely confident. There was nothing to hold them. There was no opposition virtually to their movements. And at that time, of course, the Luftwaffe still could provide air cover, so that the Germans were extremely optimistic and convinced that the war was going to be over, that they were going to win it easily.
Just 10 days after the invasion, the Germans have pushed all opposition to the sea.
They had defeated whatever resistance there was. They had destroyed the French resistance in a very short time. The British were running. There was no reason for them not to be ecstatic.
But the soldiers of both the retreating and advancing armies are not the only ones on the move.
Germans had opened their offensive in the west with massive air attacks, creating loads of refugees which impeded British and French troop movements. In some places, the people had had their houses destroyed in the First World War and were just horrified that it was all going to happen again. Most of the British army retreated on Dunkirk in good order and was intended to have won many of the battles they encountered with the German army as they retreated.